Welcome to Asia Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. I'm sure that many people will be relieved that this episode will focus almost entirely on Australia, because the situation in the Middle East remains confused, with a Schrödinger's cat situation, with the Strait of Hormuz being simultaneously both open and closed. Now, as I foreshadowed, last week was a big week in Australia, with the release of the new National Defence Strategy and the Integrated Investment Plan. Now, most of the reporting that I've seen of these documents misses the point. Almost all of the reporting has been haggling over what percentage of GDP defence spending will or won't reach. That's largely irrelevant, as are the actual dollar amounts and the effects of inflation. All of these claims and counterclaims miss the main point. The only important question is Australia's defence capability increasing at the required rate? And I think most people would agree that it definitely is not. For the close to $60 billion per year we are spending on defence, the return is appallingly low. Greg Sheridan in The Australian, I don't always agree with Greg, he produced a neat, if overly negative summary saying, since coming to office, the Albanese government has cancelled the 4th Squadron of F-35s, cut armoured troop carriers, cut Hunter-class frigate numbers, cut howitzers, cut naval demining capacity, cut Navy supply ships, reduced the activity days for reserve soldiers, cut the program to upgrade Anzac-class frigate weaponry, cut the plan to put Tomahawk cruise missiles on Collins-class subs, retired some Anzac frigates, cut a program for military satellites, cut a program for civilian satellites, done nothing to deliver the strategic merchant fleet Albanese promised before the 2020 election, and much more. Now, the merchant fleet, I think that's being reviewed, and with all respect to Greg, that is a bit too negative, because on the positive side of things, we are acquiring Megami frigates built in Japan, and we are also introducing into service 4 Peregrine EWISR aircraft, all built entirely in the US, so there's zero Australian content in either the Peregrine or the Megami, and I'll have a bit more to say about Megami in a moment if I've got time. So, the NDS and IIP say the government will add $53 billion to defence spending in the 10 financial years beginning this year, including $14 billion in the first 4 financial years. But even with that funding boost, which is real, I simply don't think that it's going to be enough, because another thing that comes out in the documentation is that AUKUS, the, I think, doomed attempt to acquire nuclear-powered submarines, is scheduled to vacuum up even more money. I think, put simply, AUKUS will take more dollars than the government is adding to the defence budget. So stuff has to go. Stuff is being reprioritised. I probably won't have a chance to detail that in this episode, but I will in the next one. So where's the money going? Well, like I say, AUKUS, unfortunately, but it's also forecast that a greater priority will be given to uncrewed systems, with spending increasing from $10 billion over the coming 10 years to between $12 and $15 billion. That includes a little over $3 billion on acquiring smaller drones of the type being used so effectively by Ukraine in fighting back against the Russian invasion. And that's positive stuff, and already systems such as Ghost Shark and Ghost Bat are very promising local developments, along with Speartooth, which is another slightly smaller autonomous underwater vehicle, smaller than Ghost Shark, that can launch drones of its own. Now, the speech of Defence Minister Richard Marles to the National Press Club last Thursday, I was there, was frankly appalling, insulting, short-sighted, full of stupid examples, and most seriously of all, demonstrated an utter lack of recognition, let alone acceptance, that one of the major causes of current global instability is the behaviour of the United States. As so many people are pointing out, and even the Prime Minister has accepted, the US can no longer be relied upon for security, and that situation might be permanent. Now, it gives me no pleasure to say this, but Richard Marles confirmed in public, in his own words, or those of the departments with some of his own touches, all of the depressing things I've been saying. And some people have quite liked my comparison with Hiro Onoda. And just a reminder, Second Lieutenant Onoda was the last Japanese soldier to surrender in the Second World War. He did that in 1974 in the Philippines because he was utterly convinced that Imperial Japan would never be defeated. Richard Marles has the same level of blind faith in the US relationship when we can all of us see, the erratic behaviour of the United States with our own eyes. Here's a direct quote from the speech of Mr. Marles. As the world enters this current period of disorder, some argue that the idea of the global rules-based order, an order where nations can pursue their security and economic interests consistent with international law and free from coercion, is now extinct. I disagree. This is Richard Marles continuing, if you ever have the chance to fly low over the waters to our north that separate us from Indonesia, there are times when you can actually see the maritime boundary between our two countries. Well, no, you can't actually, Minister. He continues, it is marked out by the southernmost extent to which Indonesian fishing boats operate, and by knowing how far to go but going no further, these fisher people are operating in accordance with understood maritime law. They are operating in accordance with the global rules-based order. Now, this is his argument to supposedly prove that the international rules-based order still exists, but it's complete and total nonsense. I wonder who writes this sort of rubbish. Indonesian fishing boats are crossing into Australian waters all the time. In fact, I'm pretty sure that last year was a record year for the number of illegal crossings into Australian waters. And the fact that some of these boats have onboard GPS devices and stay on or near the agreed maritime boundary has nothing to do with whether or not the international rules-based order still exists. Now, here's another exchange. A journalist asked Mr. Marles, but do you concede that Donald Trump has damaged American international prestige? Marles, again, as always, ducking the question, well, I think I'm not going to walk down that path. I think what you have to do is a clear articulation of the United States strategic posture in both their national security strategy and national defense strategies, which were released last year. And just one more example to make the point. Journalist asks, given Donald Trump's bellicose behaviour and his unpredictability, don't average Australians have a right to be worried? And do you think that the United States is a reliable ally? Marles answers, well, in answer to the last part, I do. I very much see the United States as a reliable ally. Now, that's the end of that quote. The whole speech was just so out of touch with reality. I think this is a potential political problem for the government, to have a senior minister so obviously in denial of what the public can see every day, with US behaviour showing no signs of becoming any more predictable. In fact, if anything, Trump seems to be spiralling into a place where decisions are becoming even more random and even more haphazard. And I can tell people that on top of the current chaos in the Middle East, Trump is once again telling aides that he wants to grab Greenland. This raises the prospect of an actual armed conflict between most of NATO and the United States. As for NATO itself, the alliance is over and the Europeans know it. Trump remains under the thumb of Vladimir Putin. And as well as the Australian public being able to see what is going on, I expect members of the cabinet would also be scratching their heads, wondering where Marles is at with this ridiculous shtick that the world hasn't changed. As I mentioned, even the Prime Minister has said it has altered and won't ever return to the previous period of growth and unrestricted international trade. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen anytime soon, but I wonder how much longer he can be kept running such an important portfolio, holding on to views that are completely contradicted by the facts. Now, a few other things in the past that I've mentioned that people might have been inclined not to believe, including contempt for various groups, retired service people and academia and the media. Now, here's a direct quote. Again, Richard Marles, because increases in defence spending do not happen as a result of think tanks or former generals or washed-up bureaucrats. It happens by winning arguments around the ERC table where every dollar is hard-fought as it should be. Yes, it's the brave politicians who do these things. He also does not understand the concept of deterrence, which is truly shocking. He believes that China needs to be matched ship for ship and submarine for submarine, and hence the role of the US in his mind is indispensable. But that's simply not how deterrence works. Smaller powers like Australia can protect themselves by developing militaries that can inflict unacceptable levels of pain on an aggressor. This is what Ukraine is doing to Russia right now, and if the Russian president was not a mass-murdering lunatic, the invasion of Ukraine would have ended ages ago. By the way, Richard Marles and the government trumpet this, that the Integrated Investment Plan, is the greatest peacetime build-up in Australia's defence capabilities since the end of the Second World War, saying that they're going from the current 2% of GDP to 2.4%, and that this is a massive triumph. But it's not. I've done some online research. It's extremely easy to do. And for those who are interested in GDP numbers, as I've said, I don't think that they are relevant in terms of producing capability, but they are extremely relevant by way of comparison. And to pursue the case, I searched the numbers for the years after the 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and the Australian government lifted defence expenditure. The current government will be shocked to hear that in 1980 to 81, defence spending was 2.4% of GDP. That's this government's future target. In 81, 82, it was 2.5%. 82, 83, 2.6%. And again, 83, 84, 2.6%. At the height of the Vietnam War, the spending was even greater. 1967, 3.79%, and 1968, 3.84%. Can someone, anyone, other journalists, the opposition, think tanks, call out the nonsense that the government is sprouting, that we are currently seeing a record increase in defence spending? It's simply not true. It is not borne out by these statistics. Now, as both Ministers Marles and Conroy enjoyed pointing out, when in government, the coalition had a poor record on defence spending, and that's absolutely true. But why stop there? The lowest spending on record was during the Gillard government, when in 2012-13 it plummeted to a miserable 1.6% of GDP. Who was Defence Minister at the time? It was one Stephen Smith, one of the two authors of the Defence Strategic Review. In the 2 years before that 1.6 figure, it was the same as, it was 1.78%, and this was in the wake of Labor's 2009 white paper that had a number of capability aims, such as acquiring 12 conventional submarines, larger and more capable than the 6 Collins class, that of course remain in service 17 years after Labor started work on replacing them. I'll remind everyone, Labor's current spend is 2.08% of GDP, way short of the level achieved by several previous governments. The way we are going, I would say that the government's attitude to defence is sort of like that of Israel. And that is that as long as they have the support of the United States, nothing else matters. We are going down the same path, and as the US gradually alienates all its allies, the only one left in this part of the world will be Australia. Some people might think that's fine until the US loses interest in us, and then we are truly effed. You see, Israel will be okay because sitting in some bunkers in the Negev desert are about 300 nuclear warheads, and Israel has the means to deliver them. F-35s, F-15, Dolphin-class diesel-electric submarines from ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems. Yes, you heard that right, a conventional diesel-electric submarine that can fire cruise missiles carrying nuclear warheads. And to back up that capability, Israel has Jericho 30-ton, 3-stage, intermediate-range ballistic missiles capable of reaching targets in the Middle East and beyond, equipped with their nuclear warheads. Israel also has a very large defense industry able to manufacture, for example, Merkava main battle tanks. In other words, even without US support, Israel can well and truly defend itself. Now, in case people haven't noticed, Australia doesn't have 300 nuclear warheads and the means to deliver them. Our level of self-reliance is far, far less than that of Israel. Or to put it differently, continuing the Marles doctrine of total dependence on the United States is a major, major mistake. But let's be charitable and try and find a few more positives. I mentioned some drones. Another is that there will be funding for the urgent acquisition of medium-range air defense missiles in the Patriot PAC-3 category, meaning defense will be forced, against all the instincts of Mr. Marles, to consider solutions from South Korea, Europe, and possibly Israel. Now, for political reasons, I think it would be difficult for any Australian government to announce that they were spending billions of dollars on military technology from Israel, given the devastation of Gaza and now the brutal invasion of Lebanon, with more thousands of dead civilians. I could be wrong, but it would be a brave minister prepared to make such a decision. However, the evaluation process is likely to last for a year. Defence has only ever once moved with lightning speed, and that was to destroy 46 advanced Taipan helicopters rather than donate them to Ukraine. And I suppose if circumstances in the Middle East have altered radically, Israel might come back into play, but I somehow doubt that. So there are a couple of excellent choices. South Korea has a system called KSAM. Europe has another PAC-3 equivalent known as SAMP-T, SAMP-T. Now, both KSAM and SAMP-T have been battle-proven in Ukraine and in the Middle East, so we might end up with those. That's the positives. But there are two huge mistakes, well, more than two, but two that I'd like to focus on. No more Redback infantry fighting vehicles, and no more 155mm Huntsman self-propelled howitzers. This is at a time when Europe is screaming for more 155mm systems, and Finland, which historically knows a lot about fighting high-intensity conflicts against much larger enemies, has ordered an extra 112. It's the same SPH that we're getting. It's the Korean K9. The Australian variant is known as the AS9. Finland getting another 112 to take their total to more than 200, while we, thanks to the Marles doctrine, are still sitting at 30 with no prospect of any more in sight. In this country, we are told that rocket artillery is the solution to all of our problems, with the army having ignored the existence of rocket artillery for 30 years, but the actual truth is you need both. You need as many self-propelled howitzers as you can possibly get. But here we are, stuck with outdated findings of the Defence Strategic Review. It didn't take into account the lessons of Ukraine. The defence establishment and Richard Marles are far too stubborn to admit, even indirectly, that they have made a major mistake. Now that self-propelled howitzers are being built by Hanwha at their ultra-modern factory in Geelong, which they spent $250 million of their own money to develop, they could deliver Huntsman, is that the plural of Huntsman, I suppose, at marginal additional cost. But the government won't budge. I'm out of time. There was a lot more that I wanted to cover about AUKUS and Megami frigates, but I've set myself a strict limit of about 20 minutes. I'm going to stick with it. So let's do AUKUS, and let's do the very, very strange and disturbing story of the Megami frigates and why none of them will ever be built in Australia in the next episode. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye for now, and see you next time.
That's today's Asia Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.